Coffee and sitting around together. We haven't done this for a long time, so it feels good. We're really happy to have Shelley with us again. I think it's been, 3 years?
About that, yeah.
3 years ago that she was here, and I think, I'm not sure if I was the one that introduced her at that time or not, but maybe it was. But I do know one thing. I think I said it because, that week, that time she was here, is that after hearing her speak, I said, this is an organization that we should be supporting. And Grace and I did a little bit more looking at their website and a few things, and they have become one of our favorite charities. And we're really happy to be able to support them, and I would encourage you to look closely as well. As I was sitting and listening to her message this morning, I couldn't help but think of what it would be like to have to leave my home on the spur of the moment with maybe a knapsack with a few items in it and flee somewhere. I just can't even picture that. That does not even resonate for me. And yet I also thought of this war we're having over in Ukraine, and I'm thinking, your budget's less than $750,000. That wouldn't buy one of those rockets. Like, how do we put that in context? It wouldn't even buy one of those rockets that they're firing. And so to me, it's one of these things that is really hard to reconcile for me. And I like what they're doing. And as you said, your name changed in 3 years. And when Mennonite Foundation, an organization I worked for 20 years, changed its name to Abundance, Darren said to me, he says, so what do you think? Are you okay with the name change? And I said to him, are you doing what you're telling me you're doing, and are you doing it well? And if so, the name is only a brand. It's only something that identifies you. Do what you're telling me you're doing and doing it well. And so whether it's Compass or Mennonite Coalition, Refugee Support, doesn't matter. And I think they're doing it well. There's some interesting stories on their website. You might want to look at their website and read a few of those stories. Family, I think his name was Samuel. There's a Rosia, Juan, are a couple of stories. You might want to read them. Very interesting stories. So, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about what it is that Compass is doing, and maybe some of the obstacles you're facing, some of the challenges you might have, and then we'll take some time for a few questions as well.
Sure.
Okay?
Yes, thank you. I'm going to stay up here just for the sake of the camera in case people are joining us from home. So good morning again. Thank you for staying. A little more, this is more of an informal time. So Compass Refugee Centre, as I said earlier, used to be MCRS, has been adequately refreshed. And one of the questions you might, before we get into what is it we're doing and going on right now, is, why did we change our name? Again, on the website you can read more about it and why we chose the name Compass. But at the end of the day, it really was about identity, a clarity of identity. Because we, our original formation was, again, the work of 4 of our Mennonite churches, First Mennonite, Sterling, Olivet, and oh, here comes the brain fog. I know there's one more in there, and I apologize to that church. And then MCC. And MCC was our administrative platform for 17 years, until 2004, when we got our own charitable status. But many people thought we were still with MCC. And we were hearing, actually on a regular basis, well, I gave my check to MCC, didn't you get it? I was like, no. People thought we were at 50 Kent. And it's like, no, we've never been at 50 Kent. And so there was just a lot of confusion. And I remember visiting one of our churches, and they thought we were like the denominational organization, so part of MCEC's response to refugees. We haven't been on MCEC's budget for a long time. And so there was a lot of confusion about our identity and who we were with and who we weren't with, and were we a department of an organization or were we on our own? And so we took a good look at that and just said, that's actually, it's great, we didn't want to lose Mennonite, but we also needed to have a distinct identity so that people would know that we are on, we are a standalone. The other piece is we needed to recognize that, over the years, our budget, our first year in 1987 was $25,000. This year it's $700,000. And that budget is continues to be supported by many of the Mennonite churches and certainly individuals who attend those churches, but it's also supported by many others. And we wanted a name that reflected everybody that's a part of Compass. Compass is an us thing. And then, in 1987, we started with people from Nicaragua and El Salvador, and now people from 69 different countries. Many different walks of life, many different understandings of the world and of God. And so we wanted a name that would reflect who we had become. And it was interesting because I did speak at First Mennonite back in the fall, one of our founding churches, and some of our founding members attended that church as well, and they were just so excited. And they were really excited about our logo because when you put it over top of First Mennonites, it's the same thing, it's a 3/4 circle. And the idea that we remain open to whoever, and we want to create a space for whoever comes to us. And for people, we would have people coming to us and saying, do you have to be Mennonite in order to be helped by you? No. And so we've had a very, very positive response. And part of the design of our logo was to refresh that, particularly because we were taking the word Mennonite out of our name, we wanted to refresh that we were not changing our identity, and that was, and so restoring, our original logo was a logo actually of Central South America with a thick cross and a dove overlaid on that. And what we've done is we've said, the compass represents the whole world, and we use the language often of navigating complex systems. So it's a geographic term in the sense of people are navigating, finding their way to Canada. It's a functional term in the sense of we are navigating complex systems, both in terms of the refugee claim process, but also settling into whatever community that our friends are settling into. And then it's that conceptual of we are a faith-based organization and Jesus is at the heart of it. The love of Jesus is at the heart of that. And we wanted to make sure that people understood that that was our foundation and our life. And we remain, one of the key passages for us is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And so without regard for the identity of the person left on the roadway, we come alongside and we cover and we care for and we walk with until they are fully able to be on their own again. And sometimes also I challenge our staff to think about taking the place of the person on the roadway, having had their dignity stripped, having had their identity taken away from them, having had all control taken away from them, all of their resources taken away from them. And to listen as people come up and take a good long look and decide not to help. What would that feel like? Particularly the people that you expect would help, right? In the story of the Good Samaritan, you have the priest takes a good long look and then decides to cross over the road and keep going, and the Levite does the same. So the people who are in the inner circle of the faith of the people of God are the ones that are actually not engaging the need. And then you get this stranger who was not held in very high regard, coming and not only taking a look, but touching and cleansing and putting on his donkey so that he's walking through very dangerous territory, by the way. That road to Jericho was quite dangerous. And to be taken to an inn and put into a bed and to know that your every need is going to be taken care of until you are well enough to be on your own again. What would that feel like to experience that? And you mentioned you can't imagine what it's like to have to leave everything. But it's good for us if we can bridge some of our own life experience with some of that recorded imagery. It's not just kind of a story. It's Jesus was telling something that actually happened quite often on the Jericho Road. If we can link to that. And if we can link, one of the things that we want to do at Compass is the 100th anniversary of, hundreds of people who had been put into cattle cars in Ukraine and sent to Southampton, England, and from there to Montreal or to Quebec, and from there to Waterloo, and got off a train and walked to Herb Street Mennonite. And from there were billeted out across Ontario and across the prairies. That 100th anniversary happens July 19th, 2024. And the refugee story is a key narrative, a key part of the story of this area. And it has formed who we are as a community. It's a key cornerstone. And I think of even just Herb Street Mennonite and some of the people from there, left to start a new church that at the time was called Kitchener-Mennonite Brethren. And that church started Waterloo Mennonite Brethren, of which I am a member and have been on the board of. And now Kitchener-Mennonite Brethren is a part of that again. It's all one church again. So it's with just a Waterloo site and a Kitchener site. But that all started because hundreds of people got off a train seeking safety in our community. And God's people responded by opening their homes, opening their wallets, opening their lives, their workplaces, in order that people could begin a new life. And with this Ukraine piece happening again, it's not the first time, right? And it's happened a couple times since 1924. But I have friends who grew up sitting at the feet of their grandparents hearing the stories of fleeing Ukraine. And this has deeply, deeply touched their lives. In fact, one of my friends said it was just like being, just hit hard, knocking the wind out of her as it was like sitting at the feet of her grandparents all over again, right? Time does not erase loss. Time just reframes it, right? And so here we are in this generation with it happening again. And, we know that 3 million people have fled the country. We know that another 10 million are displaced within the country. We know that another few million are trapped right where they are. They estimate about 12 million are trapped by what's happening and can't get out because humanitarian corridors are not being respected. And you just think, this is pivotal. This is basically, not technically, but I think theologically and socially, a third world war. Because it's so pivotal to how we function as a world now. We are very much a global community now, and there isn't anybody not touched by this. The challenge of people coming here, and there's been about 9,000 who have made their way to Canada already, and this is where we come in, because the challenge is the status that they are being given is a temporary status. It's basically a relocation, not a resettlement. So it's a temporary reprieve from having to be in the midst of the bombs or to be, in one of the neighboring countries, and the goal being that, we are, I think it's either the second or the third, we have the second or third largest population of Ukrainians in the world outside of Ukraine. And so it created an opportunity where people could come and history could be bridged and played over all again as people come here. But they're coming with this temporary status. And the other piece is they're coming without the men in their lives. Because men 18 to 60 years old, as you know, have to stay. And so it's women, and it's children, and it's seniors. And so it's really interesting to, hear, okay, well, they're getting an open work permit. So, again, those of us, and not to be, to exclude the role of fathers in the lives of families, but imagine as a woman having to leave your husband behind, bring your kids, and you've all been through, I think it's fair to call hell breaking out on earth, and somebody puts an open work permit in your hand and says, go to work. Yeah, not so easy, right? Children can get into school, they can get into elementary school, or they can get into high school, but that's only going to go on for a couple months, and then it's summertime. And so who looks after the children? Who helps the children navigate our crazy education system right now, where one day you could be in a classroom and another day on a computer, and COVID all rampant around. And so it's a very volatile, precarious situation that they're coming into. They don't have access. We're waiting actually to hear if the province will waive residency requirements in order to have access to OHIP. Because if they don't, they will have no access to health care unless they can pay for it. So it's very different. When government-assisted refugees come through that pathway, they get a year of support. They get permanent residency status, they get a work permit in their hand, they get access to health care, they get access to Canada Child Benefit, Ontario Child Benefit, they get access, and it's not a lot of money. That government-assisted money is about the same as really Ontario Works rates. It's not a lot of money. It's the benefits that help to make it possible to make ends meet. Refugee claimants don't get access to those benefits, but they do get access to interim federal health, and they do get access to legal aid for their claim process. Ukrainians aren't even going to get that. So they're coming basically, with all of this trauma, all of this experience, to be safe physically from bombs and mortar shells, but now have to figure out how to do life here. And so I've been saying to churches, I'll actually be putting out another email this week. I know that this church would have got one a couple of weeks ago, just kind of updating as we learn what's happening. But I've been saying to people, think of this as more of a private sponsorship opportunity. And think, rather than 1 year, think 2 years. That if you can in any way help, think of it as a 2-year commitment. Because we all hope this will end sooner, right? We know there's peace talks going on, but we're not talking with a very peaceful man, right? And a man that's not oriented to peace. So, and we know how much peacemaking is important to our ethos, but if it's not important to the one on the other side of the table, the odds are not in the favor of peace right now. We also know God can do extraordinary things and has a way of settling matters rather quickly. And I admittedly have prayed around that end as well, as I think even of, Hezekiah taking the matter before God. He took this letter that he received from his enemies, put it on the floor in the temple before God and said, God, you got to do something here. One morning there were 185,000 soldiers dead on the ground. War over, right? Those are things we can't even imagine in the scriptures, never mind imagine in our present day. But we have a God that gets to decide how this is going to play out, even with all the human effort, right? But this is chaos. And it's breaking hearts and breaking lives. And even if the war were to end today, and if Russia were to pull completely out, the Russian soldiers go, what's there to go back to? If you look at the buildings and stuff, right? There's nothing to go back to. And this was one of the stories that really hit me, that my friend gave. It hit me hard because she was sharing an excerpt from a family journal about there was a family member had gone back to family land and home, and it was destroyed. There was nothing to go back to. And so even if it ends today, it's going to take time to rebuild. And so where does Compass fit into that? Because, we work with refugee claimants, and we've said to our regional leaders, I've talked with Chair Karen Redmond, I've talked with Mayor Jaworski and Mayor Verbanovic. We are here to do whatever we can. This is the beauty of not being government funded, is we can do whatever we want, actually, as long as our community supports us, as long as those who are financially supporting us support this. And so we can stretch outside our boundaries. And we already do in many kinds of ways. We have people coming to us all the time that don't fit our mandate, but nobody else is open, right? I remember taking a call, probably early January, and this person explained who they were. They were not a refugee claimant, but they were someone without status and in a very precarious situation. And said, "Can you help?" And I said, "Of course we can." And they broke down and cried because they had called 6 other organizations that had said no, and gone to a couple of others, and the doors were closed. And our door has never been closed. It has been practically closed, but if you knock on it, we will open, right? And so we're here to help whoever, and we've had many people call, should I make a refugee claim? People from Ukraine or friends of people from Ukraine saying, should they make a refugee claim? And we are actually advising them no, because as soon as you make that claim, what happens is your passport gets taken away, and all your ID, you're given a new ID. It's called they call it something different now, but I can't remember what it is because it just changed. So brown paper is what we've always called it. It's got their refugee ID number on it, and that gives them the ability to get, for example, Ontario Works, or to even go get their driver's license or whatever, right? So that's what you're left with. And if your claim is denied, because this is the big difference, is a refugee claimant, their claim has to be based on a personal attack on them, not a generalized condition. So they have to prove that their name is on a hit list, not just that they're in the middle of a war. And so the people that we might be able to help are, and I've posed this to Immigration Partnership, is people, for example, let's say Russia does end up occupying Ukraine, and like Erdogan in Turkey, decides to clean house. And now, leaders, political leaders, diplomats, judges, teachers, journalists start being targeted. That's Those are the parameters of a refugee claim. Or let's say that, and this is one that, we had to do a little bit of thinking about. We know, for example, that hundreds, thousands of people in Russia are being imprisoned for protesting this war. And many have left Russia, and hundreds are flying into Cancun, Mexico, buying a car there, driving to the Mexico-Texas border, and asking to be able to make a claim for protection, because they're fleeing being imprisoned in Russia for protesting. And if any of them make it here, they will need to come, and their only way of being here will be to make a refugee claim. And then we would be able to help them with that. So just in these things, you can see it's quite complex. And the work that we do, we have to understand all of these different pathways and how they impact a person's journey. And their status determines their access to resources. So this present crisis is really, again, a relocation with no benefits, right? And so it's going to be a very precarious situation for quite a while for many people. The other piece that comes into this, as I said, we have people from 69 different countries. So who is the last group of people that is still kind of running concurrently that was seeking refuge in Canada? Large populations, Afghanis, right? And they're wondering, why is the door being wide open for people from Ukraine and I can't get my family here? Or, why did the government say 40,000 and there's only 8,000 so far that are in Canada from that situation? And so a lot of what we do is to try to help people understand there may be some discrimination involved in this, but there may also be, and there's no question that there's influence happening in this. I don't think it's an accident that our Deputy Prime Minister is Ukrainian. And where you have influence, you exercise influence. But think of it more in the sense of Esther was Jewish and intervened at a time that could have cost her life, but for her people. And we celebrate Mordecai's statement to her, who knows that you might not be in this position for such a time as this. Right? So I want to take the edge off of maybe the idea that there's discrimination going on here. There very well may be, but there's also maybe for such a time as this. Right? The other is, again, Afghanis are coming with permanent resident status, work permits, access to language school, access to housing resources, access to employment services, access to go to school. It's not great. I don't want to make this sound out that, hey, they're getting everything. It's hard. And it is very difficult to make ends meet. As you know, how hard it is to get a place to live here. We just had a board retreat early March, and I gave the board just kind of a profile comparison between a government-assisted refugee and a refugee claimant and some of the challenges, but also I just took a look at housing costs now. And, I said, I am paid well enough in my job, right? And I could not afford to get a two-bedroom apartment based on the standards of what we say is affordability. So how are people who are living at subsistence level supposed to afford it? And we have found just in the last 18 months, settlement is getting extremely hard for us in terms of putting a roof over people's heads. And we've said to the region, please do not just send people to us expecting us to come up with the answers. This is a 50-year problem in the making. In fact, it's at least 50 years because I remember very well, I still drive by it every now and then, the house that we lived in New Hamburg on George Street was a brand new subdivision created, made possible by funding from the government to provide affordable housing opportunities for people in my parents' early family generation. And I remember, 20 years later, taking some time off of my schooling and took a full-time job, and all I could afford was a room and a house in Waterloo that still rents out rooms in Waterloo. I saw a Facebook ad, I think back in the summer, where I recognized the address right away, and they had just renovated, and I'm like, I wish you had renovated when I lived there, right? But because that was all I could afford. And here I was, a manager in a business, and I didn't have, my bills weren't that bad. I mean, I had a car loan and student loans, but it wasn't, the payments weren't excessive. But all I could afford was a room and a house. So this has been a problem for a long, long time. And to ask one organization to try and find answers to this is not appropriate. And especially when we haven't been able to find answers for 50 years, right? And what we are finding now within the last 18 months, I would say, so in September 2020, at our last board retreat, I said about 74% of the people that we worked with resided in the KW Cambridge area. That has now dropped to 69% as people cannot afford to stay here. And we actually now have people living in 45 different cities that we are working with. Part of that is because of COVID, we went to remote. And so all of pretty much like 95% of our appointments are by remote now. Occasionally we have people come in to sign documents or whatever. And that's been wonderful, as you have discovered and people at home have discovered, the ability to access online. It's not a lot of fun for our caseworkers to be on Zoom 6-7 hours a day. It's exhausting. We had to move them all into their own offices in order to be able to create proper distance, but also just from the sound. They could no longer work in a collaborative space because if you've got 4 people working on Zoom or answering the phone, it doesn't work, right? So, and our office is in the middle of the building that we are in, so there's no external windows. And so it's been kind of like working in a little bit of a dungeon for 2 years. And so this, this summer, we have new owners of the building, and they've agreed to let us put windows into each of these offices so that it can at least feel some sense of openness to the rest of the office, right, and bring in some light from the hallways and stuff. But that's, I just got the quote on Friday, because we annexed another office and they put a doorway in because we need more space because of all the protocols, but also just the change we needed to do in our program. It's going to be like $8,000 just to help people's mental health right now. I was saying to someone, I said, we've actually lost staff over having no windows because mental health, right, we've become so much more aware of isolation. But what that's done also for us is to make us so much more aware of the isolation of those that we work with. And last year, we worked with over 1,900 people. And you might think, well, where are they all? There can't be that many people in this area. Well, they're spread across 45 cities. But again, still about just under 70% of them are just in KW alone. And so, and when we talk about helping them, it's not just with the refugee claim, it's making sure, Mother's Day was really special for us this year because this was the first year we did this with the focus that we did. We still had, moms that were new to Canada, first Mother's Day in Canada, and we took care packages to them and a lily and a bunch of other things. And we have an email from one of the dads. He says, I just broke down and cried. He says, I had no way to celebrate my wife as a mom, and you made that possible. So when we talk about helping people, we're not talking just about the claim process. We're talking about life, the ability to do the day-to-day, and to make sure they have enough food on the table. And so that's one of the reasons we've annexed this other office space. So we now have about 4,500 square feet. And this additional space is going to be a place where people can come and, we'll have public computers up. Can you imagine being connected with your family through your screen on your phone? WhatsApp, right, is how many people stay connected with their spouses and children that are still in countries of origin. And we'll have public computers with larger screens, and so they can come in, make an appointment, and they can spend time with their family on a larger screen, on stable internet, right? And while they're there, they can grab a juice or a tea or a coffee and a nutritious snack, because we know they're hungry. And so we want to make sure that they have something to eat. And then, we hope to have volunteers when we can get back to doing that, who will sit and maybe even just watch a soccer game with them. Or, just play a game of Jenga with them, right? To be the friends. Like, we really miss the relational aspect of our work. It's one of the things that sets us apart from many of the organizations, is we focus on relationship first. The claim process is just an excuse to get to know them, right? And the key is that we are the only organization, the only, not even just only faith-based organization. We are the only organization that focuses exclusively on refugee claimants between Windsor and the GTA. And so our presence is essential. And our board has agreed that, that is our scope of geography, because there is literally nothing in between. And we have now more people in Cambridge and in Guelph, 4 times more people than we did when we started as an organization, just in those 2 cities alone. And so that's why we've grown from a $25,000 budget to a $700,000 budget. And you can imagine, as I'm sure you have experienced as a church even, how difficult it is to keep people engaged or to get new people investing when you can't see them and you can't tell the story. And so I really appreciated you saying, hey, we love this organization, one of our favorites. Oh, thank you for doing the pitch for me. But so we have, our new mission statement. I've actually put our cards on the back there so you can take it at your leisure. But when we changed our name, we also upgraded our mission statement to bring some clarity to it. So, and it's right in our tagline. So Compass Refugee Centre, assist, accompany, advocate. So assist is everything it has to do with the refugee claim process. That includes submitting the forms, helping them get legal aid, helping them find a lawyer that they can trust, because there's a lot out there that you can't, unfortunately. Helping them with translation and interpretation. And we are now having to pay for some interpretation, largely because we can't get volunteers into the office right now, and because we have so many different languages now that we don't need all the time, but so you can't really ask a volunteer. We don't know when somebody's going to show up needing Urdu. So we have to access that. And same with the translation. But it's also getting them ready for their hearings. So hearing preparation. We actually provide a space now in our office for people to do virtual hearings. We were one of the first to do that in the province when that became an option. And it's been amazing to have people come in for their hearing and come out of that confidential space and look at their caseworker and say, I got a yes. In fact, we've only had one family come out of that room and not get their decision right away and then later get a no, and now they're in appeal process. which is also part of what we help with to go through that appeal process. Or, the very last piece of it is humanitarian and compassionate claims, which we will also help with. And then there's the ones that even those are denied, and then our staff need to counsel them regarding their deportation. And those are the hardest conversations, and our staff often leave early after one of those days, because we've now spent 2 to 5 years with this family, because that's how long it takes. And we've gotten to know them quite well, and it's hard to have that conversation to say, yeah, you're going to be deported. Let's talk about what that means for you, and what's your plan for when you land back in country of origin. On the plus side, when they get that yes, they start their permanent residency process, which again is a part of that assist piece. That takes another 1 to 2 years. And then there's the family reunification process, which we hear a lot about, a lot of the people saying, why can't I get my family here? What's really sad right now is on average, 38 months to get your children here. So you can go through the claim. Let's say it takes the minimum amount of time, say 2 years. Go through your claim, get your yes. A year for permanent residency to get all that in order. So now 3 years. And then it's another 38 months before you can get your child here or children here, right? So we have a huge advocacy piece around that. If you ever want to write your MP and say, that's ridiculous. We are a country that believes in family, and that children need both of their parents if they are alive and together. And this is not okay. Now, on the other side of that, let's understand that there is a piece to this that Canada is also really passionate about child trafficking. We are the first country in the world that said if you offend a child in another country and you are convicted, as soon as you land on Canadian soil, you will be arrested and you will do it all again. So we have a fella right now in a BC prison who was convicted in Thailand, spent 10 years in prison there. They picked him up at Vancouver Airport, and he's got another 10 or 15 years in a BC prison for having done this, right? So we take very seriously child trafficking. The piece about this, though, is we also define family differently than a lot of places around the world. If your brother's dies and he has children, it's understood you will take them under your roof and they will become your children. There's no registering that with the government. There's no formal adoption process in most countries. You just do it. They're family. Canada doesn't recognize that. If you can't prove that there was a legal piece to that, you now have a long journey to explain why you have these children and why you think they should be here. So that's a challenge. That's a cultural piece, that's a systems piece, that's a legality piece, right? And so, but you can imagine if you have, so what are we up to, 6 years since you last saw your child, since you last wrapped your arms around your child or around your spouse sometimes, right? And now you get to start to be family again. And so we recently made a decision about a year ago. Up until about a year ago, we said we were done as soon as the family arrives. Our job is done. And we said, no, we're actually going to keep the file open for about another year. Our system is set so that caseworkers, the system automatically flags every 90 days on every client to make sure that no client goes without contact from us for more than 90 days. Respecting their agency and their desire, but we just check in. And we said, we're going to continue that for another year because that family reunification time is not as easy as it looks, especially if you've been apart for a long time. Years ago, I met somebody, I was in the Bible Mission thrift shop over on Highland. I like to hang out in thrift stores. There's often great deals there, right? And I was in there and I saw a woman and I looked at her and I thought, oh, you look like you're from Rwanda. I've been around to many different countries. You start to get a sense of some of the distinctive presentations of people. So I asked her, do you mind if I ask, like, are you from Rwanda? And she says, yeah, how did you know? And I said, well, I didn't. I'm taking a risk here, but and anyway, we got in a really good, quite a lengthy but profoundly moving conversation. She had escaped from the genocide in 1994. The day that she left, there was her mom, and her 2 kids, and somehow they got separated. And she ended up in Uganda in one of the refugee camps, and she didn't know what had happened to her kids and her mom. And so she was in this refugee camp, and in the process of time, she got permission to resettle in Canada. The day she was to leave to get on the plane, she found out her children were still alive, but they weren't there, and she had to make a decision. Does she go on to Canada and maybe prepare for a new life for her children there, or does she stay in the refugee camp and just get her children resettled with her there, which would have meant probably never getting out of the refugee camp again, because we know that only 2% of people ever get resettled out of a refugee camp. So this was her shot. And she chose to come to Canada, thinking that she could get her children here. It was 18 years, and they had just arrived earlier, like I think it was weeks before I met her. She said, I don't know them. I know they're my daughters, but they're now young adults. I don't know them. And she leaned in, she says, and honestly, I don't even like them, right? They were just very different people, and there's so much had happened. But here they were, a family, now trying to have to figure out how to be a family again, right? So whether it's 6 months, I mean, all of us have been separated from family, right, over the last couple of years, doing driveway visits at best. One of my grandchildren was born right before the first shutdown. Seeing them from the driveway or the backyard, or maybe getting a walk in the park, we finally were able to come into the house where everybody felt safe, because we're all the protocols that everybody felt comfortable with, everybody was in sync with, and we know what that has felt like. So imagine somebody coming here, and this is why we do the every 90-day flag, because it can be so isolating, right? And it's also so that we can find out the third piece. So that's we have the assist, which is the refugee claim, the 90-day flag, which is all about the accompany and getting them into school and making sure they've got food to eat and making sure they're not alone, and mental health is going okay, or well enough, and getting all the resources they need to do life here. And the third piece is the advocate piece, so assist, accompany, advocate. And this can be very system related. So yeah, we're advocating it's not okay to take 38 months to get kids here. We're advocating that it shouldn't take so long to go through a refugee claim process. All those kinds of things. But at the grassroots level, we also have to do advocacy. So when the lockdown first happened, and a 90-day flag came up on one of our single moms who had 4 kids. The caseworker came to me and she said, we have a problem. I said, okay, what's going on? This single mom was taking flack from her neighbors because their kids were going outside all the time. And in the process of kind of digging in that a little bit, again, respectfully, because you don't want to force people. We're all about kind of self-agency. Don't share what you don't want to share, right? But over the course of the conversation, discovered that there had been a fire in an apartment adjacent to this one. And between the smoke damage and the soot damage and the water damage, the only inhabitable place in her apartment was her living room. Because the landlord wasn't doing anything because, she's just a refugee claimant, right? And we found that out, and that's why her kids were going outside all the time. Imagine living in a living room, right, with 4 kids, and dealing with COVID and all the upset around that, and trying to do school at home with them. Forget it, right? And it took us, we had to engage our local MPP, we had to engage the fire station, we had to engage, other community resources to finally get the landlord to schedule a cleanup. And actually the fire station came in and did some cleanup and made it habitable for her. That's some of the advocacy we have to do, is just to make sure that people are being treated properly and not taken advantage of just because they don't have status and they're not going to put up a fight. Because for many of them, putting up a fight is why they're here, right? They protested something and it cost them everything. So they're not going to protest anything here. And so that's the advocate portion of what we do. There are some really plus sides to this. We will be making a more formal announcement with Laurier, but we now have an agreement with Laurier. Refugee claimant youth do not ever anticipate post-secondary education because they have to pay international student fees. And so, but we've now set up a scholarship fund, and with Laurier, 1 or 2 students a year can get full scholarship at Laurier if they are financially eligible and academically eligible to attend Laurier. And we've expanded that fund so that other students, let's say you want to go to Conestoga. Well, 2 semesters at Conestoga is $14,000 a year. They can't afford that. So we've set up a scholarship fund and that people can give to so that we can help refugee claimant youth access post-secondary education while they're waiting for the outcomes of their family's refugee claim. And once they have protected person status, their fees go to domestic student. And once they have permanent residency status, they can get OSAP grants and loans. And so we will measure, if they get OSAP, let's say they're in the full scholarship with Laurier and they become permanent residents, but they're still in financial need, and they can get an OSAP grant and loan, we only lower the scholarship by the amount of the grant so that they have a chance to truly build a new life here. That's one of the exciting assist, accompany, advocate, all under one umbrella pieces that we do. So you can see we've become quite complex over the years and quite robust and quite essential to our community because everything that we're doing is to build the strength of our community and to build bridges between a welcoming community and the people who need that welcome, and then get out of the way when they're fully integrated and feeling like they can carry on. So that's why we rebranded, reframed it, because we believe they need to be here. They belong here. That's a lot. Any questions? What stood out for you?
Questions?
I have a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, and this is just out of... You don't think they can hear me, Bob?
For the sake of those online, there's a microphone going around here.
A couple of questions just that I'm curious about, and you may or may, like the refugees that are coming from Ukraine, and I understand that it's a 3-year max right now that they can stay. That's the... would you say that from your knowledge, are a lot of these people wanting to stay, or is it their hope that someday they can go back?
Our understanding is that many of them would like to go back. There are certainly some, I've talked with some people who are connected to people from Ukraine who have family here and, would not only come, but would roll over to permanent residency, and the government is going to be expediting that process for people who already have family here. If they come, they don't have to do it through a refugee claim process. They can just apply for permanent residency and then they can stay. So. But
And
many of them are hoping to go back, as would any of us, right? Nobody wants to be leaving their countries. So many of them are hoping they can go back.
And my other question, totally different from that, would
Sure.
be when you mentioned about your staff having to go into individual offices and working alone and all the mental health issues that happen with that. Through the last couple of years, I've worked from home instead of from the office. Is there a reason that your staff had to stay in the office and could not work from home?
Oh, yeah, well, let me bring some clarity to that. So we work on a rotation model, so nobody's in there every day. But there are times when you just need to be there. That's where all the files are. We do get people who need to show up. They can't be helped any other way but to come to the office. So we have been working, so our caseworkers now are in 3 days a week. They can work from home 2 days a week. But as the executive director, I have some flexibility, but I need to be there, right? And, other staff, just for the sake of the staff cohesion, we need to actually be with each other. Again, that relational piece is so important to us. But yeah, I think the challenge it was not so much coming into the office that was the problem. It was actually having to move into smaller, isolating offices. And so we work in a hybrid and always have. But once people start coming, like we're hoping in May to be able to bring people. So each caseworker will have one day where they can bring a client in. And part of the reason for that is, for example, if you're doing what's called a BOC, a basis of claim document, that takes a minimum 3 to 6 hours to complete. Doing that on Zoom is brutal, right? And so that's partly why sometimes it's in office, is to just reduce that constant being on the computer all day.
Yeah, I find Zoom meetings, I kind of zoom out sometimes.
Yeah.
I just also would like to say how, I don't know where hearing what you've said about this organization, I feel not only can we also appreciate how blessed we are, but what great work you do.
Thank you.
How do you as a staff keep up your morale?
That's a tough one. It is. Even aside from COVID, we talk about IRCC fatigue, Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada. That system is not built for welcome at all. You might think it is, but it's kind of like, I described this actually to a reporter the other day from City News. So there'll be an article in City News sometime in April, I think. It's like somebody's come knocking on your door, threatened, their well-being or their very life threatened, and you quickly assess and go, yeah, we can see that you are in trouble. We can see the marks or whatever, right? And so you let them in the door, but then you actually usher them out your back door and say, go live in the shed in my backyard while we figure out if your claim is valid or not, right? And then they do things like, we talk about, for example, work permit documents, or even right now, the big one is eligibility. So when somebody comes, they have to do what's called an eligibility interview, and that determines whether they have the elements necessary to make a claim. That also, if it's determined they are eligible to make a claim, that's when they can now get their brown paper and then apply for social assistance and apply for a work permit. Those eligibility interviews right now are being scheduled for September. It's April. So no access to resources. And then when you apply for the work permit, it's taking about 5 to 8 months to get it right now. And if you applied it using a document with a certain revision, and they decided to change the document, and that could only be simply that they looked at it, decided it was still good, but changed the date, the revision date on it, because it shows that it was looked at. If your document lands on a caseworker's desk at IRCC, and they responsible for giving you a work permit, and that revision date isn't the newest date, you have to apply again, right? So it's all these little twists and turns that do wear on our staff, and to realize all these hurdles that are constantly thrown in place, and the hoops and the changes, and we'll do it this way this month, but we're going to do it this way next month. That takes its toll on our staff. And so we spend a lot of time, I spend a lot of time in our staff times. We do what's called mission time, where we spend time refreshing our mission, but through one of the angles that we look at is through our own well-being. And so what is your personal mission? How are you taking care of you? We've built in lots of downtime. If you've had a bad day, you can go home that day and take care of yourself. We've built in retreat days where staff can take up to 3 full retreat days a year. Not just a day off, it's not a float day. It's a retreat day where maybe they go spend a day with a counselor or a spiritual director, or just taking time to reflect on their own well-being, and then they come back with, this is what I need to do next. We have full benefits it includes counseling and stuff like that. So we are very passionate about that, which kind of goes back to that question of why do we want people in the office? Because with all of the stresses of the job, being isolated at home only adds to that. So bringing them into the office to check in with them, to make sure they're okay, and to see each other is a part of our wellness plan. Yes, there's a question back here behind you. Yeah.
So just hearing what you're saying about, not being a very welcoming place, Canada and their immigration review and citizenship, or refugee citizenship. So how could that be more streamlined so that things would be easier to move more cohesively through the red tape, shall we say?
Yeah,
and
lots
then
of red
how
tape.
do people who support you, do we write our MPPs? How does that, what would work to make things easier?
It's a big question. It goes all the way back to 1913 with Frank Oliver, who established the first immigration policy of Canada. And it was the first, one of the fruits of that policy was the targeting of Greek people on the docks of Toronto. When you look at our history of Canada, it's actually not all that welcoming from a system perspective. There's a really good book. It would take you a little while to read, but it's a great read, called The Land Newly Found, written by Granestein and I can't remember the other, but Land Newly Found. And it chronicles the waves of new people coming to Canada and what they experience. And that it's almost like going through a gauntlet every wave. And that seems to be part of the characteristic of being Canadian from a system perspective. We talk a big game, but then we make it really hard. And it's almost like that rugged frontier, got to make it on your own, right? When my husband's grandfather came from Italy, there weren't all kinds of supports, and he was sent up to Timmins to the Dome mines to work, because back then you could tell people where they could live, and that you found your way. And we have that same attitude today from a system perspective, except it doesn't work that way anymore functionally. You can't just relocate people and they can get a job, because now you have to apply for a work permit. You have to prove that you're even allowed to be here. You have to, there's all these kinds of things, right? And wave after wave after wave of people have experienced the very same hurdles. And so I honestly think, in answer to your question, it's a big question. And I think there's many facets to it. And I believe, if we take a step back for a second, I believe personally that the church has a fundamental role in this, in the same way that MCC did back in, 1978 with the private sponsorship pathway and working with the government to even make that a possibility. But even further back from that, the church has to catch theologically in God's economy of the kingdom, there is no such thing as borders. If there had been the same border policies in place when Jesus' family had to flee to Egypt to protect his life, there would be no Jesus. If you go back even further, if there had been the same border policies in place when the people of God had to go to Egypt during famine, there would have been no people of God. The 70 of them would have been wiped out by Pharaoh, and that would have been the end, and God would have had to raise up another line, right? The border policies today are designed on a basis of economics and ideology that are in direct conflict with kingdom ethics. And I believe the church needs to rise up, number one, and begin to pray about that. And how do we deal with that, even within our own hearts, right? The other piece is we need to be speaking to our MPs to say, if people come seeking safety, we should not be treating them like they're lying, right? Are there some that lie? Yes. We've even seen some of that in our organization, but it's small. We're talking maybe 0.5%, right? And I've been to some of the countries that produce refugees. There's nothing more profound than holding somebody's hands and telling them you believe them. Because you don't even need to know the details. You've seen where they've come from, right? The third piece to that, I think, is helping even our local MPs understand the challenges in our cultural understanding of life. Family culture, family systems, right? The Western family approach of nuclear family and everybody grows up and gets their own place is not the culture of the rest of the world, right? So for example, in Guatemala, where I've been, which is about 1/5 the size of Ontario, if you are targeted in Guatemala, there is no safe place to go, right? It would be like going from Kitchener to maybe Ottawa, the farthest reach, and thinking you're going to be safe. It's not. And there's two fundamental reasons for that. One is they hunt you down. We've had people hunted down from continent to continent. If you're a human trafficker, you don't care about boundaries or borders, right? But the other is the concept of family land, which our Mennonite community understands deeply, but the rest of Canada doesn't. So, we bought a house on one street in our subdivision, and then when we had, too many kids, not too many from a value perspective, but from a space perspective, and I was working at home doing counseling ministry and teaching ministry, and my husband had his workshop, we were running out of space quickly. So we sold our place, and we got a bigger place in another part of the subdivision. You can't do that in a lot of countries like Guatemala or Peru or Zimbabwe. You're on family land, and you can't take somebody else's family land. So there is no going to another part of the country. And our government doesn't recognize that, right? To them, it's what they call a durable solution. Just move far enough away that they can't find you. Well, there is no far enough away, unless you get to Canada, right? Or right off the continent that you're in for some of them, right? So there's the prayer. There's the speaking to that kingdom ethic. Do we actually believe that a kingdom ethic says there's no borders? Not that you can't have border security and all that kind of stuff, but from a kingdom perspective, people have a right to be here to seek refuge. And then, that perspective of, the systems and structures and understanding family systems and family culture and that we have to have a fundamental change to that, which, and I'm going to sound cynical here, but after more than 100 years, you realize this is a big mountain to move. But what I tell my staff is one little nudge of the rudder of even the biggest ship puts that ship in a different place down the road, right? So let's kick the rudder. I think there was a question. Did you have a question at the back earlier? The gentleman at the very back.
Jerry? No.
No,
we
okay.
just- Any one last question yet? We're getting close to noon. Well, thank you very much, Shelley. As usual, it's very informative, and it helps us try to gain a little bit of perspective. And we appreciate that and your time with us. And again, if you have more questions or whatever, it's easy to get a hold of them. And if you feel so inclined, support them. So have a good day, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks, everyone.